All right, so before we start with these other journal entries here, let's just review the rules that will go on the right side of your first page of the notes here. I know I only gave you the first two, which is cash in, debit top, cash out, credit bottom, and I told you about a couple of the other ones while we were doing the other transactions, but let's look at this now. Fill out the full 8 rules here. Well, if cash increases on the debit side, cash is an asset, so any asset increases on the debit side. So any asset will increase on the left, and that'll be on the top of the journal entry. Cash out, credit bottom. Well, if cash decreases and you put that on the bottom of the journal entry, any asset that decreases needs to go on the bottom of the journal entry. So then remember the journal entry where we had cash coming in because we borrowed some money. You had cash in on the top of the journal entry. You borrowed money, which was a liability increasing. That went on the bottom, the credit bottom. So the cash got the debit, liabilities got the credit. So anytime a liability increases, you're going to put it on the credit side, the right side, which would be the bottom of the journal entry. Okay? And then the opposite is true. So if you're increasing liabilities on the bottom of the journal entry, that means anytime you decrease a liability, put it on the top, put it on the debit top of the journal entry. And then remember the common stock, right? Cash in, debit top. We had cash on top and we had common stock on the bottom. So the cash was increasing with the debit. Common stock is stockholders' equity. That increases on the bottom, right? And the opposite also holds true. Anytime you decrease your stockholders' equity, you go debit top here. So make sure you look at those rules. You can fill those out on the first page, and let's apply them now to these journal entries here. Right, so we got ASA as a contract. We already did this in the last part of the module, in part 1 of module B. You already did the analysis, so we won't talk about that. If you don't understand why these accounts are there, make sure you review the video set from the first part of this module B when we did the account analysis. But here it is. We did the analysis. We already did the hard part. We got an asset going up here, and we got equity going up. You got asset going up, and you got equity going up. If you remember from transaction F, remember we put the revenue on the bottom because the equity is increasing? So anytime you're in revenue, that's going to go on the bottom of the journal entry. You have stockholders' equity increase here, $6,000, and then you got an asset going up. Just like if cash is increasing, you put that on top. Accounts receivable is also an asset. You put that on top too. So we got $6,000 on top for accounts receivable. I'll go A+, right? You got the asset going up, you have revenue going up here. Letter H, cash in, debit top. You have cash and deferred revenue. We collected $24,000 in cash, so cash is coming in, debit top, $24,000. Deferred revenue is a liability, just like notes payable is a liability. When it went up, we put that on the bottom of the journal entry. Deferred revenue is the same thing. So deferred revenue is the liability going up. One more quick note, we talked about deferred revenue in the last part of the module B, but I want to make sure we're clear here. Deferred revenue does not go in equity. It is not real revenue. You have to deliver some goods in order to record revenue in order to increase that stockholders' equity. We did not deliver anything yet. We're going to start delivering this stuff next month. We owe it. Since we owe it, deferred revenue needs to be a liability. Okay? Let's go to the next one. Paid $1,500 cash to employees for work performed in January. Cash out, credit bottom. That's the rule. Cash out, credit bottom. We're going to put that in for $1,500. The amount is decreasing. Again, positive numbers in the journal entries. Don't put a negative there, even though the account is decreasing. Right, now what about the wages expense? Let's look at our rules. Well, when we did revenue, we had stockholders' equity increasing with the credit. When you have an expense, you see the little minus sign there. Stockholders' equity is decreasing on the debit side. So decrease on the left and put the amount on the top of the journal entry. So that's what we're going to do with that expense here. And the other way you can learn that is because you know that cash just used up the credit. So cash used up the bottom here. We got to put my expense then on top. And the rule you need to remember is anytime you have an expense, you need to put that on the top line. It needs to be a debit. Because you may not have cash that goes along with the expense. You may have an expense and maybe accounts payable to go with it. You may have used your electric and then have accounts payable owe the bill. Well, the expense would go on top. And then if you had accounts payable, it would be in a liability increasing. That would go on the bottom of the journal entry. Right, so one more note I'm going to make here is I got my expense account is going up, but my stockholders' equity account my stockholders' equity in general is going down, right? The process of an expense account increasing is reducing my equity. So you got to remember, that's one of the harder things to remember in this class too, is you got this account that's going up, but it's also reducing your equity. And because it's reducing your equity, if you remember Rule 8 there, kind of see it on the side of your screen, Rule 8 said put it on the debit side. So expenses increase on the debit side because they decrease your equity. Let's go to the next one. Cash accounts receivable. I got cash increasing and accounts receivable decreasing. Cash in, debit top. Put the $4,000 on the top line. So accounts receivable must be on the bottom line, $4,000. And if you look at rule number 4, right, any asset decrease has to go on the credit. And this is rule number 1 and rule number 2. Rule number 1 and rule number 3. Cash increase is a debit. Any asset increase, cash is also an asset, is a debit. All right, so you got one asset going up, one asset going down. Pay $250 to your supplier for grooming supplies. You got cash out here, and you got accounts payable going down. Cash out, credit bottom, $250. Where does the accounts payable go? It's got to go on top here. And we'll put that in as $250. Notice how both of these numbers are going down, but we're putting them in as positive numbers. Right, I got a liability decreasing. That's rule number 6, I think. And I got cash, which is an asset decreasing. That's rule number 2 and rule number 4. Any asset decrease goes as a credit. Any liability decrease goes as a debit. And one more. Cash dividend. Again, the cash is easy here. We paid cash to our investors. $2,000. It's cash going down. Cash out, credit bottom. So where do you think the dividend must go? Dividends are going on top here. Dividends are debits. What do dividends do to your equity? They decrease your equity. Rule number 8 says any stockholder's equity decrease must be a debit top. Right? So basically, and again, I'm going to go D plus here. The dividends are increasing, but your stockholder's equity is decreasing. And the stockholder's equity decreasing is what wins. Any equity decrease goes on the debit side. So this wraps up the piece on the journal entries, and then on the next set of videos, we'll talk about the T accounts.